Hello everybody, and welcome to another of our videos where we're trying to bring everything virtually to you at home. Now for those of you that don't know me, my name's Kat and I'm a member of the bird team here at the Conservancy Trust. And before I begin the video properly, I just want to say a huge thank you for all of your ongoing support and for watching all of our videos and tuning in so regularly. It's really helping us here at the Trust because obviously it's very quiet, so to know that we've still got support and people are enjoying watching our videos is really great to see. Now you can probably guess what my video is about today. We've got feathers up here in Redge's wildflower meadow, so we've got a lovely backdrop behind us, and just before we started filming a red kite did fly over, a wild red kite being mobbed by crows, so we may be joined by more wild birds and maybe some birds of prey as well. Obviously I can't guarantee anything, but it would be nice if they do decide to pop on over, because I've also got some feathers of some of the native birds of prey that you find here in the UK. But next to me, all of these, a variety of different feathers from the birds here at the Trust. Now the reason we have so many is because birds molt their feathers, so they drop them on purpose. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about molting later on in the talk. But you can see here just how different all of the feathers are. And feathers have been around for billions of years. Dinosaurs were the first animals to ever have feathers. And nowadays birds are the only animals on the planet to have them. And you think all of that time for these feathers to evolve and become adapted for different purposes. Now feathers for birds offer a variety of different important purposes. Obviously one main thing is flight, but there are also other elements to feathers which I'm going to talk you through as we go along. And well, to start with, obviously here you can see a range of some very large feathers actually. In fact, this feather here, this very tall one in the middle, belongs to our griffon vulture, Hector. Now some of you may have seen a video that was done by Matt earlier this week, and if you didn't, I recommend you do watch it. He's doing a bit of training work with Hector and he's a very impressive bird. So it's not surprising really that this huge feather comes from him. But then we've also got some very tiny feathers. So these are feathers that I've gathered from some of our non-bird of prey species. And we've got some very tiny colourful feathers as well. Now don't worry, I appreciate you can't see them that close up, especially being so small, but we will be giving you some close-ups as well to join this video. So that's size, but you can see different shapes as well. We've got the very rigid falcon feathers, we've got the very soft looking owl feathers, and all of these are slightly different. So some of them are wing feathers, so they may be primary feathers or secondary feathers as we call them, and some of them tail feathers as well. And we do have a few special ones. As you can see, it's a little bit breezy and some of the feathers may blow away, but it's fine. We've got a park full of birds, so we can always get more if we need to. Now there are, as I've mentioned, many different roles to feathers, and one of the really important roles is insulation, especially for birds that come from very cold areas. So things like the snowy owl. So we have our snowy owl here at the Trust who goes by the name of Sweeney Todd, and we also have great grey owls as well. Now I have gathered some snowy owl feathers from Sweeney Todd. Don't worry, I didn't pluck them out. She's just starting to molt, and these feathers are incredibly fluffy. So these aren't her flight feathers, these are some of the downy feathers which keep her really nice and warm. If you see a bird fluffing itself up, it's actually able to trap warm air underneath the feathers, and it helps to keep them really warm. As well as that, the birds that come from really cold areas have thousands of feathers, hundreds of thousands of feathers. In fact, it's estimated that the snowy owl has around 300,000 feathers. And in actual fact, I mean, I'm holding a little bundle right there. It doesn't look like a bundle, but there are quite a few there. And Sweeney's only just started her molt of all of her feathers. Great grey owls as well come from very cold northern hemisphere climates, so they don't have quite as many feathers as the snowy owl, which is found in the Arctic tundra, where it's extremely cold and they need feathers on the undersides of their feet as well. But also they still have a good 100,000 or so, and it's incredible really. In fact, great grey owls look a lot larger because of all of the feathers covering them than they actually are really. They've got quite a small skeleton underneath all of that feathering, so it really gives you an idea of that importance for insulation. But to give you a bit of an idea about birds that maybe aren't in a colder climate, species that you might find in your garden, a wren for example, very small garden bird, estimated to have 7,000 to 10,000 feathers, which is absolutely incredible. And again, some of those feathers will help for the insulation too. They just don't need to be quite as well insulated as those colder climate birds. So that's a little bit about insulation, but also that method of fluffing yourself up to trap warm air can also be used to release warm air as well. So it can actually be helpful in cooling a bird down. So that's a very important role for feathers to play, and that's just one role. So the other role will be communication and display, which seems quite an obvious role perhaps, but many birds use a variety of different feathers, different colours to display to other birds. So you'll all be familiar with, I'm sure, the peacock feather, probably one of the most famous feathers, a very iridescent colour, and that will be used to display. A male is generally the most colourful in lots of bird species actually. I don't know about you, but when I was younger I always thought that it was the females that were the prettiest and the males had the boring plumage, but actually it's the other way around, and the males are very pretty to attract their female, and also they can be used as a warning, make the bird look a bit bigger, and that lovely shape to the top of the feather looks a little bit like an eye, so it can be quite threatening if there's a predator. But back to our raptors here, we've got a secretary bird feather, but also a very small little secretary bird crown or crest feather. And for those of you that have seen a secretary bird, or have maybe even been here and seen Madeline or Angola, you'll know that these little feathers are just behind the head, and they will either stand bolt upright or they lay them flat down. Again, that's for display, but also it's what helped get them their name, because they look a little bit like a secretary's quills behind the ear. So that's a display feather for one of our birds here at the Trust. Just careful that they don't all blow away. So as well as display, you've obviously got that really important purpose of camouflage. Now with lots of birds, especially our owls for example, camouflage plays a really crucial role in their hunting, but also protection as well. And I've actually got some diagrams to show you, next of all, from my box of goodies, of some of these camouflage elements of the feathers being put to good use. So in this picture we've actually got a tawny owl in a tree, a very natural habitat for a tawny owl, and you can see that those feathers, the colouring and the markings help to keep them really well blended in to that tree. We've also got, we may have, oh fantastic, look at this. Hopefully you can see it. We have got a wild red kite just showing off behind me. Just enjoying some nice thermals, lovely warm day. So as the sun's heating up the earth, it creates these lovely warm currents, which allows the red kite and lots of other raptors to just cruise around a few wing beats, but how fantastic is that? Well, I'm sure he's probably going to stick with us, and he's really upstaging me now, but I do have some more photos, and in fact from there you may not even be able to spot the great grey owl. I'll point him out. He's actually right there, but again, that camouflage on the feathers means that he can blend in really well and sneak up on his prey, because the owls are stealth predators, so they rely on being able to ambush, and obviously they've got their silent flight, which we'll get to soon. Finally, I have got a snowy owl for you, and again I'll point her out. It's a female because she's got lots of white dapples on her plumage, and that the male snowy owls are generally more pure white. So that's some pictures there for you. Red Kite is still around, but he's off screen at the moment. So there's a bit of camouflage, a bit of insulation. Now I've already touched on the molting. So feathers are so important that all birds will annually molt all of their feathers. Now there are 7 different types of feather as well, so it can get very, very complicated, but I'm just gonna keep it nice and basic, if you like, nice and relaxing. So obviously you have your wing feathers and your tail feathers, and the red kite is right now showing off those wing and tail feathers. Tail feathers are very important for sort of steering and balance, and obviously the wing feathers are really important for being able to get those thermals, those currents right underneath the wings. Then you've also got contour feathers, so they're the feathers that sort of make up the general shape of the bird that you see. Filoplume feathers, which are sort of sensory feathers for touch. Semi-plume feathers, now they offer a little bit of insulation, but the main feathers for insulation are the down feathers. Again, I have a few examples, and I'm sure most of you will have probably seen some down feathers. Now I think they've started to blow away, bear with me. Okay, so these very, very fluffy feathers are the down feathers, and every single bird has down feathers, and they're nice and close to the body. Now these down feathers are from our turkey vulture, one of our turkey vultures called Burdock. He's black in colour, so you don't see the white down feathers because they're right underneath, nice and close to his skin. And then finally you have bristle feathers. Now these are the feathers that protect the eyes and also the face of the bird. So that's your sort of 7 feathers in a not very technical way of explaining, but it gives you a bit of an insight that there is quite a lot to feathers. Now the other very, very important use of feathers is obviously waterproofing. Most of you will have heard that expression, water off a duck's back. And that's because generally birds have impressively good waterproofing on their feathers, and that's because they have a preening gland, and that allows them to basically oil their feathers very regularly, in fact daily, and it adds a nice waterproofing to the feathers, but it also takes away the ability to be silent. So actually most of the feathers here, they've got a lovely sheen to them because they've got all of the lovely oils all over to keep them nice and waterproof. But if I show you an owl feather, so we've got this lovely owl feather here, very soft, and if I run my hand over it, it doesn't really make much of a sound, and that's because if the owls used a lot of waterproofing on their feathers from that preening gland, then they wouldn't be silent. So they only use a little bit. And actually, I'm going to try a little experiment next of all to sort of show you this, because I've got a spray bottle. So I'm going to spray the owl feather as if it was raining. And initially, the water droplets will just sit on the feather, but gradually they'll be seeped in, absorbed by the feather. And that's just because there's just not enough waterproofing there. So we often say that owls and rain don't really go well together because they act like a sponge and they literally absorb all of that moisture. Whereas something like a bald eagle, I'm going to have to get up again, that needs plenty of waterproofing, often going after fish, not necessarily submerging themselves in the water, but just able to be able to get wet. The osprey is one of the birds that's probably got really good waterproofing on feathers because they actually submerge themselves into water to get their fish. So I'm going to spray the bald eagle feather as well, and I can see that the droplets are literally just sitting there, whereas the owl feather, the water is already starting to seep through. Now obviously another important part of the owl feather is that silent flight, and that's because they've got this lovely serrated edge to the feather, which allows the air to just pass through as they're moving and flying along, and it doesn't make a sound. Whereas the feathers, for all the other species that don't have this serrated edge, they obviously make a noise against the air when they're flying, and that doesn't matter for them. Things like vultures, their food is already dead, and obviously things like the eagles, they hunt very differently, whereas the owls want to be sneaking up on their prey. Now the owls may not sound very well adapted for being waterproof, which is a little bit unfair. They do have some waterproofing. They still spend lots of time making sure that their feathers are in perfect condition. But actually, to give you a bit of a comparison, we've got an ostrich feather here. Now with all of the other feathers, apart from the peacock, they've got that classic all nice cluster. So the feather is all together, and actually each little bit of feather is held together by microscopic barbs. So when you get a split in a feather, and it's really difficult to try and smooth it out, the birds can do it perfectly well. Now for the ostrich, the feathers aren't linked at all, and there's absolutely no waterproofing whatsoever because the ostrich, the largest bird on the planet, doesn't have that preening gland. So when they get wet, they get very, very wet. Now, one thing we get asked a lot here at the Trust is to identify feathers. So most of you will be out enjoying a bit of the countryside for your daily exercise at the moment and may be coming across feathers and wondering what they are. I have a selection of feathers in my special box from some of the UK species of bird. Not this one. This is a secretary bird. You're only going to find those in Africa, so I'm going to put that one back in the box. But the red kite that we had flying over, that is a red kite tail feather. You've got that lovely colouring, and you kind of get a bit of an idea of size there as well. We've also got some lovely owl feathers, very, very small, and again very soft with the lovely serrated edges. This belongs to the long-eared owl, a very secretive owl in this country, and one that if you see, you're incredibly lucky to see. They make camouflage very, very easy. We've got another pigeon. So often pigeon feathers are sometimes mistaken for being a falcon perhaps, but they're quite easy to identify because they're usually grey, sometimes just have this lovely little bit of white going up the side, or like this pigeon feather here, they've got the sort of three tones, so like a dark grey, white, and then more of an even darker grey close to black. We've also got some very special feathers in here. In fact, this one is the goshawk. which is very impressive. So we've got a goshawk wing feather and a goshawk tail feather as well. So really unique, very cool to see. And we've got 2 tawny owl feathers. So again, 2 different types of feather, both from tawny owls. So if you find one of those out on your walk, hopefully you'll be able to identify it pretty well now that you've seen them. We've also got a buzzard feather, so very brown in colour, but they can be quite large because, similar to the red kite, they're quite big birds. And finally we have our kestrel feather. So just like with the falcons, their feathers are very brittle, so they're very straight and very sturdy, and more so important for the falcons that are built for speed. So kestrels, although they are the falcon family, they'll generally be hovering in order to catch their food. So you often see them hovering at the side of the road. But for things like the peregrine falcon, their feathers need to withstand really high speeds, sometimes in excess of 200 miles per hour. So you imagine a falcon with an owl feather. It's not going to be as streamlined, and those dainty bendy feathers aren't going to survive for very long, and will soon lose all of that important condition. And birds spend a long time looking after their feathers. Without their feathers being in top condition, they could have problems with their flying and their hunting abilities, and obviously the insulation and the waterproofing and all of those factors that come into having those feathers. And that's why birds molt. So they get these fresh feathers every year to make sure that they are in tip-top condition. And generally the molt, depending on the species and the area, is seasonal. And I think the last thing that I have to show for you really demonstrates just how fantastic I think feathers are, because, well, they help us to identify a bird. In fact, you can tell with some species the age of a bird by looking at its feathers. When we have our wild birds arrive in the hospital, sometimes we need to rely on those feathers to be able to age a bird. So I think that's just one element of how fantastic feathers are. But looking here, the variety that I'm sat amongst right now, and talking to you all about the different importances of feathers, well, the final thing to show for you is this. Now, for my wedding, I didn't have a flower bouquet, I had a feather bouquet, because they're just an array of different design and colour, very unique, and I just think they're really special. So I hope you've enjoyed the video all about feathers and their importance, and thank you again for tuning in and watching.